Emmeline Caldwell heard the carriage before she saw it. The particular creak of iron-rimmed wheels on the half-thawed mud of the lane, deliberate and unhurried, the sound of a man who had rehearsed his arrival. She set her teacup down on the windowsill and pressed both palms flat against the cold glass and breathed. She had been doing a great deal of breathing lately. It was, she had discovered over the past 6 weeks, the only act that required nothing of her. No decision, no performance, no consideration of what came next. Connecticut, April 1842. The morning was gray and still, the kind of April morning that cannot decide between winter and spring and settles instead on a damp, non-committal truce. Emmeline had been awake since before 5, not because she slept poorly, though she did, but because she had developed, in the weeks since Dr. Stroud's examination, a habit of waking in the dark, and lying very still with one hand resting on her stomach, and thinking through the same calculations she had thought through the night before. She was, by Dr. Stroud's careful estimate, 4 months along. She had found out 6 weeks ago, on a Tuesday not unlike this one, at the small surgery above the milliner's shop in Harwich. Dr. Stroud had told her in his plain, unhurried way, the way men of medicine delivered difficult things, directly, watching the face to gauge the damage. She had not cried. She had thanked him and paid with coins from the small purse her father had pressed into her hands on her wedding day. "Keep something that's yours alone," he had said. "A woman who has nothing of her own is a woman without ground to stand on." She had walked the 2 miles home alone along the quarry road, and she had not told a living soul. Not Berta, who had kept the house for Emmeline's father and stayed on after his death out of something between loyalty and stubbornness. Not Reverend Quill, her father's old friend, who still checked on Emmeline with the awkward faithfulness of a man fulfilling a promise to the dead. And certainly not Alistair Caldwell, her husband of 8 months, who had left in January without much explanation, and had since communicated primarily through brief, polite letters about the condition of the upper pasture. She had told no one because she understood, with a clarity that surprised her, exactly what the news would do if it reached the wrong ears before she was ready. It would not bring her husband home for the right reasons. And Emmeline Caldwell, though she rarely felt like either name fit her properly, had made a private decision somewhere on that cold walk home from Dr. Stroud's office. She would not be anyone's obligation, not again. The carriage stopped on the gravel. Berta appeared in the kitchen doorway behind her, wiping her hands on her apron, her face arranged in the expression she reserved for things she disapproved of, but had decided not to say aloud. "I know," Emmeline said. "I didn't say anything. You were about to." She set her shoulders and walked to the front door and opened it before Alistair could knock. He was standing on the top step, hat in hand, the leather satchel she recognized from the first days of their marriage hanging from his right. He looked exactly as she remembered. Careful eyes, jaw set against the cold, a man who wore his composure like a well-fitted coat. He had dressed deliberately for this. She noted that and filed it away. "Emmeline," he said. "Alistair." Neither of them moved for a moment. The gray morning sat between them like a third party. "May I come in?" She stepped back without answering. He came inside. He stood in the front parlor and looked around the room, the way people look at places they feel responsible for but no longer comfortable in. His eyes moved over her father's bookshelves, the small fire Berta had built that morning, the braided rug that had come with the house and smelled of wood smoke and old winters. "The place is well kept," he said. "It usually is," she said. "That is not why you drove 2 days in April mud." He met her eyes. Something shifted in his expression, not guilt exactly, something adjacent to it. He set the satchel on the table and unfastened the brass clasp and drew out a folded document, heavy paper, a wax seal pressed flat, the kind of paper that cost money to produce. "My uncle," he said, and then stopped. "Your uncle," she repeated. "He retained a lawyer in Hartford." Alistair looked at the document rather than at her. "There is a legal argument to be made. The marriage contract, the original documents were witnessed improperly. There is a procedural problem in the county record. He believes, and the lawyer agrees, that the marriage could be dissolved cleanly. No scandal, no formal fault assigned to either party." Emmeline looked at the document the way she might look at a dead thing on the road. She did not touch it. "Your uncle believes," she said. "Yes. And what do you believe, Alistair?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. He folded his hands around the brim of his hat and looked toward the window. I believe, he said carefully, that you deserve better than a marriage held together by legal obligation and nothing more. I believe you are young and capable, and there is no reason you should be bound to a situation that... Stop. Her voice was quiet. It did not shake. Please stop telling me what I deserve, as though it is a matter you have the authority to decide. He stopped. You came here, she said, with papers your uncle's lawyer prepared. You are framing it as a kindness to me. She looked at him directly. I want you to hear yourself say that, Alistair. I want you to stand in my father's house and listen to what that sounds like. Something crossed his face, discomfort, possibly shame. With Alistair Caldwell, the two were often indistinguishable. It isn't the whole of it, he said. Then, tell me the whole of it. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a woodpecker was working at something in the old elm, indifferent to the difficulty unfolding below. Analyze Hartfield, he said finally. Emmeline had been expecting the name. She had been expecting it the way you expect rain when the sky turns that particular shade of yellow-gray. Not from certainty, but from the body's quiet reading of signs. Your uncle's arrangement, she said. The family's expectation. That is not the same as your choice. He looked at her then, really looked, in the way he had not looked at her since autumn, when things between them still carried the fragile possibility of becoming something real. No, he said, it isn't. She wanted to ask him directly, do you love her? Did you ever intend to love me? Is any part of you here because you hoped I would give you a reason to stay? She did not ask, because she was not yet ready to be honest about how much the answers would cost her, and she had promised herself, on the quarry road 6 weeks ago, that she would not do anything that felt like begging. Sit down, she said instead. Berta will bring coffee. He looked surprised. Good, he had come prepared for tears or for cold dismissal. He had not come prepared for coffee. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and talked. Or rather, Emmeline asked questions, and Alistair answered them with the care of a man who had rehearsed his version of events, and was discovering, sentence by sentence, that the rehearsal had not accounted for the person across from him. The Pryor house would remain in her name, a quarterly allowance, generous, enough to live on comfortably. In exchange, she would sign the document and vanish, cleanly and without fuss, into the category of a first marriage that had not worked out. You would want for nothing material, he said. Nothing material, she repeated, and in exchange I become a woman whose first marriage was dissolved on a procedural technicality before she turns 25. She held his gaze. Your uncle has been thorough. What he has not been is honest about his reasons. Alistair's jaw tightened. He believes the Hartfield connection is better for the family. For the family's interests, not for yours. They are not always separate things. They are always separate things. She set her cup down. A man who has spent his whole life letting other people decide what is correct and calling it his own judgment is a man who has not yet had a single real thought of his own. The words landed harder than she had intended. She saw it in his face, the slight flinch, the way his hand stilled around his cup. That is, he started. True, she said. I know it is, because you know it is. He looked away. The woodpecker had stopped. The kitchen fire shifted and settled. I am not trying to wound you, she said more quietly. I am trying to be honest with you, which is, I have noticed, something no one around you does particularly often. He looked at her for a long moment. You have always been honest with me, he said, even when I didn't want you to be. Yes, she said, and here we are. That sat between them, unresolved, heavy with everything neither of them had said yet. It was Alistair who finally reached for the document again. He held it without sliding it toward her. A man holding something he was not entirely ready to put down. I did not come here to hurt you, he said. I know, you believe that. He let out a slow breath. I left in January. I wrote you 4 letters in 3 months. 3 of them were about the upper pasture. He said nothing more. He did not defend himself, which was perhaps the first thing he had done correctly since he walked through the door. You did not once ask how I was managing alone. You did not ask if I needed anything, if I was frightened or struggling or... I know, he said. It came out low. And then your uncle writes to me, not you, your uncle, with a legal notice about a procedural deficiency in the marriage documents. She looked at him steadily. I received that from Leopold Caldwell, Alistair, not from you. I know, he said again. What stopped you from coming yourself, months ago, before this reached lawyers and sealed documents? He was quiet for a long time. "I was afraid," he said finally, "of what I would see in your face when I tried to explain myself." Emmeline looked at him. Something moved through her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something that was the precursor to it. The recognition of a man telling the truth about something he would rather have left unsaid. "Alistair," she said carefully, "do you want this marriage to be over?" The silence that followed was the longest yet. The gray April morning pressed against the windows, and the whole Connecticut countryside seemed to hold its breath. "I don't know," he said. "It came out rough. God help me, I don't know." And Emmeline Caldwell, who had pressed her palms to the cold glass that morning and braced herself for a yes, felt the careful architecture of her composure develop a crack. Not visible, not dramatic, but real, in the place underneath where the real things lived. Because "I don't know" was not a yes. She had prepared herself for a yes. She had built the entire morning around withstanding a yes. "I don't know" was so much harder to withstand. She stood and crossed to the window, not because there was anything to look at, but because she needed 2 feet of distance between herself and the document, and the man and the feeling pressing against the inside of her ribs. She stood with her back to him, hands clasped in front of her, and she looked out at the elm tree, at the stone wall her father had built along the pasture edge, at the quarry road that ran toward Harwick. She breathed. She pressed one hand briefly against her stomach. Then she dropped it. "I will not sign a document," she said, still facing the window, "because your uncle finds it convenient. I will not be dissolved on a technicality, because Annalise Hartfield has a larger inheritance and a better connected father. If you want to end this marriage, Alistair, you are going to have to look me in the eye and tell me, not your uncle, not a lawyer, not a piece of paper with a wax seal, that you want it over." She turned back to face him. "Can you do that?" He looked at her across the room. The morning light was full and honest between them. He opened his mouth, he closed it. "No," he said. He stayed through the morning. They did not speak again about the document. They spoke instead about the pasture fence, about the condition of the kitchen garden, about a leak in the east-facing window that Berta had been managing with a strategically placed pot. Safe things. Practical things. But Emmeline was aware, through all of it, of what she was not saying. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a stone in your shoe. Not unbearable, but present in every step. 6 weeks ago, Dr. Stroud had confirmed she was carrying a child, Alistair Caldwell's child, and Alistair Caldwell was sitting at her kitchen table discussing fence posts, and she had not told him, and she intended to keep that silence for reasons she had worked out carefully on the quarry road, and had not once reconsidered. She would not use this child as leverage. She would not allow the life she was carrying to become the reason a man stayed who did not want to stay. She would not look back in 10 years at a marriage held together by obligation, dressed as duty, and call it love, and teach her child that the two were the same thing. Her own mother had done exactly that, had stayed in a life that was more performance than feeling, and had died at 41 with the particular exhaustion of a woman who had spent her best years pretending to be content. Emmeline had sat at that bedside. She had understood, young as she was, that whatever her own life became, she would not let it be a performance. She would be chosen freely and knowingly, or she would not be chosen at all. Alistair left at midday. He had rooms at the Harwick Inn, he said. He would be in town a few days if she wanted to talk further. She nodded. He put his hat on. He looked at her one more time in that careful, reading way she had catalogued in the early months of their marriage, the expression of a man looking at something he isn't certain he understands. Then he walked to his carriage and drove back down the lane. Emmeline stood in the doorway until the wheels faded into the road noise. Then she went inside and sat at the kitchen table and put both palms flat on the wood and closed her eyes. For the first time since January, she let herself feel exactly how frightened she was. The letter from Leopold Caldwell arrived the following morning. She recognized the handwriting before she opened it. Angular, decisive, the penmanship of a man who believed that how a person formed their letters said something essential about their character. She had received one previous letter from Leopold, in the first weeks of her marriage. A welcoming note so carefully constructed to be technically warm while communicating nothing that she had read it 3 times looking for the warmth and confirmed there was none. This one was different. 2 pages. It began with expressions of concern for her health and well-being. It proceeded through a summary of the legal position regarding the marriage documents. Clearer and more detailed than anything Alistair had said, which told her something about who was actually driving this. Then it arrived at its purpose. He had become aware, Leopold wrote, that she had recently consulted Dr. Stroud in Harwick. He wished to inquire, in the spirit of family concern, whether there was any matter pertaining to her health that the family ought to be made aware of, given the ongoing procedural questions surrounding the marriage. She read that paragraph twice. She folded the letter along its original crease, and sat with it in both hands and breathed. He knew about the doctor visit. He did not know more than that. Not yet. Not the word she was not ready to say aloud. But Leopold Caldwell was not a man who asked questions he did not already half know the answer to. He was not worried about her health. He was worried about what her health might mean for his plans. "Berta," she said. Berta appeared from the back of the house. "How does Leopold Caldwell know I went to see Dr. Stroud?" A pause. "Harwick's got maybe 300 people," Berta said carefully. "Woman from out on the quarry road comes in alone, visits the doctor, pays cash, rides home alone, that gets noticed." "By someone who is already asking about me," Emmeline said. "That man has been asking about everything for 30 years, Berta said. "It's how he keeps winning." Emmeline did not reply to the letter that day. She thought about it carefully, the way her father had taught her to think about things that required precision, from every angle, without rushing to the response that felt most satisfying before she had considered all the others. Leopold had 3 possible reasons for writing. He genuinely did not know the specifics and was fishing. He suspected, and was trying to pressure her into confirming before she was ready. Or, and this was the possibility she kept returning to, he knew, or strongly suspected, and wanted to see whether she would confirm it voluntarily, giving him the advantage, or deny it outright, giving him a lie he could later produce against her. None of these motivations suggested a man acting in anyone's interest but his own. She went to her writing desk and composed a reply. "Dear Mr. Caldwell, I thank you for your expressions of concern. I am in good health and have no news to share at this time. Yours, Emmeline Caldwell." She read it back. It was accurate. It gave him nothing. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of letter her father would have written. Not deceptive, but protective. Those were not the same thing. She sealed it and gave it to Berta to post. Then she sat a long time at the desk with her hands in her lap and looked at the phrase she had written. No news to share at this time. At this time, the clock on her situation was not abstract. It was biological, and it did not care about her plans or her pride. In 6 weeks, perhaps 8, there would be news whether she shared it or not. The question was not whether Alistair would find out. The question was whether she would be the one to tell him, on her own terms, or whether Leopold Caldwell would get there first and turn it into a weapon, before she could make it into a truth. She needed to know what Alistair was actually thinking. The decision arrived the way decisions sometimes did. Not through deliberation, but through the sudden absence of resistance. She had been thinking around it for 2 days, and now she was done. She would go to the Harwick Inn in the morning. She rode in on her gray mare, alone, in the plain brown coat she wore for errands. She tied the horse at the post outside the inn and went through the front door before she could reconsider. The innkeeper, a cautious man named Fowler, looked up from the register with professional neutrality. "Mr. Caldwell, she's he in?" Fowler's neutrality flickered once. "Public room, ma'am." "Thank you." She walked through before he could announce her. Alistair was at the far table near the window, alone, with a cup of coffee and a newspaper he was not reading. She could tell from the door, the way his eyes were aimed at the page without moving, the way a person sits when their body is in one place and their mind is somewhere else entirely. He looked up when she entered. She watched the sequence. Surprise, then something sharper than surprise, then the careful settling back into composure. She crossed the room and sat down across from him, without waiting to be invited. "Your uncle wrote to me," she said. The composure did not crack, but it shifted. A tightening around his eyes she had learned to read as his version of alarm. "When?" "2 days ago. Delivered the morning after you came to the house." She folded her hands on the table between them. "He expressed concern for my health, and made particular note of the fact that I had recently consulted Dr. Stroud. He did not know about it from you. You didn't know about it yourself. Which means he had someone watching me, Alistair. Someone who noticed my visit and reported it back to him." Alistair was quiet for 2 full breaths. "I did not tell him that." "I know, that is rather the point." She held his gaze. "That is the man whose judgment you have been following." Something moved through his face. Below anger, but foundational, something being tested at its roots. What did his letter say exactly? She repeated it from memory, the careful language about family concern, the oblique mention of the procedural questions. She watched him absorb it. He suspects something, she said. He does not have the specific word yet. But he wrote that letter the way a man writes when he believes he already knows the answer and wants to see if you will confirm it. Alistair set down his cup. What did you tell him? That I was in good health and had no news to share at this time. She held his gaze. He will not accept that for long. No, Alistair said, he won't. Which is why I am here. She looked at him directly. Whatever your uncle is planning, it is going to happen faster now, and I will not allow myself to be managed by a man who had someone watching my movements without my knowledge. If there are decisions to be made about this marriage, they need to be made by the people who are actually in it. She paused. You need to decide what you actually want, Alistair, before your uncle decides it for you. The public room was quiet around them. A fire in the corner, though it was April. 2 men at the bar who were doing a capable job of noticing nothing. Alistair looked at her for a long moment. There is something you're not telling me, he said. Not a question. Emmeline did not answer immediately. She looked at her hands. She thought about the quarry road. She thought about I don't know, still following her 3 days later, still unresolved. Yes, she said finally, there is. The words cost her something. She felt the cost of them, the particular expenditure of letting a wall down by an inch, just enough to tell the truth about the truth. Alistair's jaw was tight. Are you going to tell me? Not today. Emmeline. Not today. Final, clear, no room for argument inside it. There are things I need to understand first, about where you actually stand, not what your uncle wants, not what the papers say. Where you stand. She held his gaze. When you know that answer yourself, I will tell you everything. She stood. She smoothed the front of her coat. She looked at him one last time. Your uncle's letter arrived before you did, she said. That tells me everything about how this has been managed so far. Start managing it differently, Alistair, or there won't be anything left to manage. She walked out through the inn and into the April morning. She was halfway home when she heard hooves behind her. She did not slow the mare. She kept her eyes on the quarry road and waited. He came alongside her on his bay gelding, close enough that she could hear the animal breathing. I wrote to him, Alistair said without preamble, to my uncle, the day after I came to the house, before I knew about his letter. I told him I was handling this myself, and did not require his further involvement, that the lawyer was dismissed. He was looking at the road ahead, not at her. I told him I would not be proceeding on his timeline. Emmeline let the silence hold for a moment. She turned it over twice, before he knew about the letter, before any of this, on his own. Why? She asked. He rode 3 strides before answering. Because sitting in that room with you, I realized I had let other people define what was happening between us, and I had been calling it good judgment. A pause. It wasn't. It was cowardice. The word came out plain and unadorned, not a performance of contrition, the actual thing. Your uncle will push harder when he gets that letter, she said. I know. And the Hartfield family will be disappointed. They have other daughters, he said simply. They will manage. She looked at the side of his face, the set of his jaw, the particular quality of a man who has made a decision all the way through, not halfway. This doesn't resolve everything, she said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. There are things you haven't told me that will change the shape of all of it. I understand that. He turned to look at her then, directly, in the way he had not managed in the public room or at the house. The way she realized he had not looked at her since September, perhaps earlier. Let me be here when you're ready. That is all I am asking. She held his gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she looked back at the road. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Not the heavy silence of the morning he had arrived, full of everything unspoken. A different kind. The kind that doesn't need filling, because both people inside it have already said the hardest thing, and are still, improbably, riding in the same direction. He found the forged letter 2 days later, in the bottom of the satchel. He had gone back to the Harwick Inn to collect his things. He was moving them to the Prior house, if Emmeline would allow it, the open door between them having felt like a conditional and provisional permission he intended to treat with care. He had opened the satchel to check its contents, and there, beneath the unsigned dissolution document, was a folded sheet of paper he had not placed there. His uncle's handwriting, he recognized it immediately. The document was dated 6 weeks ago, before Alistair had ridden to Connecticut, before he had sat across from Emmeline in the kitchen and found himself unable to say yes to a simple question. The letter was addressed to Edward Hartfield, Annalise Hartfield's father, and it was written in Alistair's name. His voice, his signature, close enough that a man not examining it carefully would not have caught the difference. In it, Alistair, or rather Leopold Caldwell, writing as Alistair, confirmed his intention to pursue the dissolution of his current marriage and expressed his sincere anticipation of a formal arrangement with Miss Hartfield at the earliest suitable opportunity. It referenced financial terms. It referenced a proposed timeline. It was, in every practical sense, a binding commitment made in his name, without his knowledge or consent. Alistair sat on the edge of the bed and read it twice. Then he folded it very carefully, put it in his coat pocket, and sat still for a moment with both hands on his knees. His uncle had not sent him to Connecticut to dissolve a marriage. His uncle had sent him to make the dissolution a formality, because the commitment to the Hartfields had already been made. He had been sent to obtain Emmeline's signature on a document, whose purpose was to clean up an arrangement Leopold had already set in motion, without anyone's permission but his own, and the letter had been placed in the satchel, so that if Alistair found it, it would appear to be something he himself had overlooked. Something filed for reference. Not what it actually was. Evidence of a man who had decided his nephew's life for him, and then arranged the circumstances so carefully that Alistair would arrive at the predetermined conclusion, believing it was his own. He stood up. He put on his coat. He rode back to the Prior house at a pace that was not quite a gallop, but was everything that a controlled man allows himself instead of one. Emmeline heard him on the drive before Berta did. She had been listening, not admitting she was listening, but listening, for the sound of hooves returning. Because something in the air of the past 2 days had the quality of something gathering, the way a storm gathers before it has a name. She came to the front room when she heard him on the steps and opened the door before he knocked. She took one look at his face. What happened? He came inside. He drew the folded letter from his coat pocket and held it out without a word. She took it, she read it again. When she looked up, her face was composed in the particular way that meant she was managing something large, and had decided to manage it quietly. He signed your name, she said. Close enough that the Hartfields wouldn't question it, Alistair said. Close enough, I might not have questioned it myself, if I weren't looking for the difference. His voice was even, precise, and entirely stripped of whatever was pressing against the underside of it. He committed you to a second arrangement before the first marriage was dissolved, she said, and dated it 6 weeks ago, before you came here. While I was still in Boston, he said, believing I was making my own decision about what to do. I was never making my own decision, Emmeline, from the beginning. She set the letter on the table between them. She looked at it for a long moment, at the careful imitation of his signature at the bottom, at the financial terms arranged without his knowledge, at the date that placed all of it 6 weeks before he had knocked on her door with what he had genuinely believed were his own conclusions. She felt something she had not expected, not anger on her own behalf. She had been processing that for months, had metabolized it into something quieter and more useful. This was fury on his behalf, clean and specific. The fury of watching someone she had not quite stopped believing in discover that his freedom had been managed away so smoothly he had not felt it happen. How long has he been doing this? She asked. The question landed somewhere older than the room. She saw it in his face, the way it went down deeper than the immediate situation, touching something that had been there a long time. Since my father died, he said. It came out quieter than the rest. I was 23. Leopold stepped in and he was useful, knowledgeable. He had strong opinions about what should be done with the estate, and with me. And I was 23, and I had just buried my father, and I let him. He looked at the letter on the table. I kept letting him because it was easier than the alternative. And I told myself that deferring to his judgment was wisdom. It wasn't, she said. Just precisely. No, he said, it wasn't. She looked at him for a moment. What are you going to do? Go to Hartford, he said. Find a lawyer of my own, not the family's. Have this letter examined. Understand exactly what it means legally, and then have a conversation with my uncle that I should have had years ago. He paused. And I need you to know, this is not about the child. Whatever it is you haven't told me yet, that is not why I am doing this. This is about who I am and what I will accept in my own life, regardless of anything else. She held his gaze. She believed him. She believed him because she had learned, over the months of this marriage, to read the difference between Alistair performing conviction and Alistair possessing it. And this was possession, clear and absolute and not new. The conviction of a man who had been working his way towards something for a long time, and had finally arrived. "How long will you be in Hartford?" she asked. "A week, perhaps 10 days. A pause. I will write actual letters, Emmeline, not about pasture fences." Something moved through her, quick and warm and unwelcome in its warmth, the way hope always is when you have been carefully managing its absence. "See that you do," she said. He was in Hartford for 9 days. The first letter arrived on the 4th day. 3 pages, the lawyer's assessment of the forged document, the formal notification sent to Edward Hartfield on Alistair's behalf, the legal exposure Leopold now faced if Alistair chose to pursue it. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in different handwriting, looser, less careful, the handwriting of a man writing from somewhere below his usual composure, he had added, "I read the forged letter again this afternoon in the lawyer's office, and understood for the first time what my uncle actually thinks of me. Not what he says, what he thinks. He thinks I am a piece on a board that can be moved without asking. I am 2 days past the anger now, and into something quieter, that I do not entirely have words for yet. I thought you should know that I am all right. Not performing all right. Actually all right, in the way that comes from having finally made a decision that belongs entirely to me. I will explain better when I return." Emmeline read the postscript 4 times. Then she folded the letter, and put it inside the small purse her father had given her, where no one would look for it. She went back to the kitchen, and she was, for reasons she did not fully examine, something very close to calm. "Berta noticed, of course. You're humming," she said 2 days after the letter arrived. "I was thinking." "You were humming while thinking. You haven't done that since." Berta stopped. "Since September," Emmeline said quietly. Berta went back to what she was doing with the expression of a woman who considers this particular data point conclusive and requires no further comment. He arrived back on a Thursday. 1 saddlebag instead of the satchel, the expression of a man who had done something genuinely hard and was neither celebrating nor recovering, simply carrying it, the way you carry things that are true. Emmeline opened the door before he knocked. "The lawyer believes the letter creates significant legal exposure for your uncle," she said, because they had been corresponding for 9 days, and pleasantries seemed beside the point. "His assessment is that Leopold will not push further," Alistair said, the same way, straight to it. "He has too much to lose if this becomes public, and he knows it." A pause. "Hartfield's father was more disturbed by it than I expected. He sent his regards to you, actually." "He would," she said. "A man who discovers he has been used as a piece on someone else's board tends to feel a certain solidarity with others in the same position." He looked at her for a moment. "You read people very quickly." "I grew up watching 2 people who loved each other and had no language for it," she said. "It teaches you to read underneath the surface." She stepped back from the door. He came inside. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The house was quiet around them, the good quiet of a place that has been properly kept and knows it. "Emmeline," he said, "I would like to stay, not as a visitor. I understand that is a different thing from what has happened before, and I am not asking you to agree to all of it today. But I would like to stop being a man who is conducting his marriage through the postal service." He held her gaze. "I would like the chance to be the husband I should have been from the start." She looked at him, at the saddlebag instead of the satchel, at the absence of any document anywhere about his person. "You can come in," she said. "We will work out the rest as we go." "That is fair," he said. "It is not entirely fair," she said, "but it is what I have." He came in, the door stayed open. Sometimes that is enough. The first week was careful, not cold. There is a difference, and they both understood it without discussion. He took the guest room without being asked, which was the right instinct. He sat at the kitchen table in the mornings with his coffee, reading or simply being present, in the way of a person who is learning to belong somewhere. He did not offer opinions about how the house had been managed in his absence. He helped Berta carry water one morning, when her hip was troubling her, and Berta received this assistance with the expression of a woman who is privately revising a position she will not acknowledge revising. On the 3rd evening, he asked if he might read to her. She looked up from her book, surprised. "Your father's collection," he said. "There is a volume of Washington's letters on the 3rd shelf I have been meaning to read for years. I thought, if you were willing, I might read it aloud. Company for both of us." She looked at him for a moment. Her father had read aloud to her mother on Sunday evenings. It had been the 1 hour of the week when the particular loneliness between them went quiet. "All right," she said. He got the book. He sat across from her. He read in a voice quieter and less careful than his speaking voice, and she listened. Outside, the April evening cooled toward dark. It was not easy, she would not yet call it that, but it was uncomplicated. The kind of ordinary she had not had enough of, and had not known she missed until she had it again. She told him on a Tuesday, not because the moment was planned, but because it was time. Because she had watched him for 3 weeks and understood, steadily and without forcing the understanding, that the man sitting across from her at the kitchen table was choosing to be there. Not from obligation. Not from Leopold's management. From something she had been careful not to name until she was certain of it. She told him in the front parlor, mid-morning, with the door closed, and Berta sent to her sister's house in the village. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All of it, not just the beginning. And I need you to hear all of it before you respond." He sat across from her. "All right. I am going to tell you the truth. Parts of it will be hard to hear. I need you to trust that I am telling you all of it. Not the version that makes me look most reasonable, not the version that positions me most favorably." She looked at him directly. "Can you give me that?" "Yes," he said, and she believed him. She took one breath. "I am with child," she said. The silence that followed was the longest she had ever sat inside. Not stunned, not the blank airlessness of something completely unexpected. The silence of a man who had suspected something and is now learning the difference between suspecting it and knowing it. Alistair did not move. He did not look away. He sat with his hands on his knees and looked at her, and whatever was happening inside him was happening in the deepest part, the part that was most real and least accessible. "How long?" His voice was low and careful. "Dr. Stroud confirmed it 6 weeks before you arrived. I believe I am approximately 5 months along." He absorbed that. She could see him doing the arithmetic, the dates, the months, before January, the math working the way math does, without sentiment or mercy. "You knew," he said slowly, "when I came here with the papers. You knew the entire time I was sitting in this room." "Yes." He exhaled. The most uncontrolled sound she had ever heard from him. A single breath that carried something enormous in it. Something she could not name precisely, but recognized as the sound of a man's carefully constructed understanding of a situation completely restructuring itself. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew what you would do," she said. "I knew the moment I told you, you would close that satchel and put the papers away and tell me we would work it out. And you would mean it, in that moment. But I also knew that 6 months later, or a year, or 5 years, you would look at me and see the woman who told you about the child at the exact moment you were trying to leave. And you would always wonder, whether you stayed because you wanted to, or because I made it impossible for you to do anything else." She held his gaze. "I will not be the woman who trapped you, not even with the truth." Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically, not completely. The way old wood breaks along a grain that was always there, quietly, finally, given enough pressure to give. "Emmeline." He pressed one hand over his mouth briefly, then dropped it. "You were sitting in this room carrying my child, listening to me explain procedural deficiencies and quarterly allowances." "Yes," she said simply. "And you said nothing." "I said quite a lot. I simply didn't say that." He stood up. Not in anger. She knew his anger, and this was not it. He stood because he could not hold what he was feeling and remain seated. He crossed to the window and stood with his back to her. For a moment, she let him. She had given him a hard truth, and she owed him the time to hold it. "You still could have told me," he said to the window. "Yes. Any other woman in this county would have used it. My uncle certainly expected you to." He turned. "Why didn't you?" "Because I have watched women spend their whole lives being kept," she said. "Kept in marriages, kept in houses, kept in situations that were never their choice, by information, by obligation, by the simple fact that they had no other option. My mother was kept. Several of my cousins are kept." She held his gaze. "I would rather raise this child alone, with this house and my father's books and Berta's company, than raise them inside a marriage where every time you look at me, you wonder what your life might have been." He crossed back from the window. He stood near the table, close enough that she had to tilt her face slightly upward to hold his eyes, and he looked at her for a long time in the direct, full way that she had seen from him so rarely and valued so highly. "I need you to hear something," he said. "I am listening." "I came to this house with that document," he said. And I sat across from you and talked about technicalities and allowances, and Annalise Hartfield. I had convinced myself it was the right thing, the kind thing. He paused. And you sat there, knowing what you knew, and you did not cry, and you did not beg, and you did not use what you had to stop me. And I have spent 3 weeks thinking about why that was the most unsettling thing that has ever happened to me. She tilted her head slightly, unsettling. Because it meant, he said, that you had already made peace with losing this marriage, that you valued your own dignity more than you valued keeping me. He held her gaze. A woman who is trying to trap someone does not do that. The word lay in the air between them. Trap, the accusation that had never been spoken aloud, but had been present in every one of Leopold's careful letters, in every line of the legal documents, in the entire architecture of what had been done to both of them. Your uncle believes otherwise, she said. My uncle is wrong, Alistair said, flat final, no qualification around it. My uncle has spent 40 years believing that every woman who marries into a family like ours has a scheme, because that is the only framework he has ever had for understanding why a woman might want anything at all. His voice had an edge now, not anger at her, but the contained anger of a man who has understood something about himself that he did not enjoy understanding. And I allowed him to apply that framework to you. I did not push back when I should have. That is not something I am going to dress up as anything less than what it is. She looked at him for a long moment. Alistair, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. This child is real, and the fact that I am telling you does not obligate you. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I am telling you because you had a right to know, and because Leopold was closing in on the truth, and I would not allow him to be the one who told you. She kept her voice steady and precise. But I am not telling you so that you will stay. I am telling you so that you can make a real choice, with all of the information, for the first time in this entire situation. He looked at her for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, and if I choose to stay? Then you choose knowing I will never allow you to manage me, she said. Knowing I will call things by their real names, including when you are wrong. Knowing I am, as your uncle has probably noted on more than one occasion, considerably more trouble than Annalise Hartfield would ever be. Something crossed his face, quick, involuntary, gone before she could fully read it. He has said something very much like that, Alistair said, several times. And, he said quietly, I have come to think that trouble, as my uncle defines it, might be precisely what I should have been looking for. She had not expected to feel what she felt in that moment. She had expected continued wariness, the careful management of possibility she had been practicing since January. What she felt instead was something that had been pressed down so long and so thoroughly she had nearly forgotten it was still there. A single, dangerous, entirely unwelcome flicker of belief. Not certainty. She was too clear-eyed for certainty yet. But something. Enough. She looked away from him toward the window, because she needed a moment's privacy from his very direct gaze. There is still your uncle, she said to the window. Yes, Alistair agreed. He will try again, not the same way, but in other ways, and you will need to hold your position not only when it is easy. She turned back. You will need to hold it, she corrected. When he is in the room, when he reframes things so smoothly you have agreed with the new frame before you noticed the original was discarded. That is where it matters. I know how he works, he said. Know it out loud, she said, in front of him. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached across the space between them and covered her hand with his. Simple, unhesitating, without any theatrical weight to it. Just his hand over hers. I know it, he said, in my body, not just my head. She looked at their hands, then at his face. All right, she said. Not surrender. Not capitulation. The beginning of something that might, handled carefully and without illusion, become what it was meant to be. Leopold Caldwell came once more, in June, with 2 days' notice this time. A formal letter addressed to both of them, which she noted and filed away as a small deliberate concession. He sat in the front parlor. He looked at Emmeline, 6 months along and entirely herself, and said, You are well. Very well, she said. He looked at Alistair. The Hartfield matter. Resolved, Alistair said. Marsh handled the formal communication. Hartfield's father was reasonable. A silence. Leopold looked at the small pitcher of water on the table between them, the only thing on it. No documents, no satchel. He seemed to be noting that absence as precisely as Emmeline was. What I wrote, Leopold said finally, in your name to Hartfield. He said it the way a man says something that costs him his customary armor. Not fluently, not easily. That was an overreach. Neither Emmeline nor Alistair said anything. The parlor was very still. I had determined what the correct outcome was, Leopold continued, and I moved to secure it without adequately considering that the people most affected by it had not been consulted. He paused. That is a pattern I have followed for some time. It has served the family's interests in certain respects. I am aware it has caused other things. Emmeline looked at him. Mr. Caldwell, she said carefully, are you apologizing? I am acknowledging, he said. Whether it rises to an apology is perhaps for you to decide. She considered that. It was, she thought, the most honest thing she had ever heard from him. Then I will decide later, she said, when I have had more time with it. Something shifted in Leopold Caldwell's face. Not softening exactly, but an adjustment. The way a map is repositioned when you discover you have been slightly wrong about the territory. The child will carry the Caldwell name, he said. He looked at Alistair. I mean that as I said it, not as a condition, as a fact I intend to honor. He stood. He held out his hand to Alistair, who took it. He looked at Emmeline and inclined his head in the gesture she had seen before, the one that lived in the neighborhood of respect without yet being fully inside its borders. Your father, Leopold said. Elias Prior, I knew of him by reputation, a pastor who read law for pleasure and argued both with the same precision. He picked up his hat. I see the quality has not diminished in the translation. He left. The door closed behind him. Emmeline sat in the quiet for a long moment. He will try again, she said finally, in smaller ways. He is not a man who concedes territory permanently. I know, Alistair said, but he also just told us something. He told us the child carries the name, she said. He did not call the marriage a mistake. He did not leave with a legal threat or a new arrangement. She looked toward the empty road beyond the window. Thomas, Leopold, concedes nothing unless he has recalculated. If he walked away, it is because he has decided this outcome is acceptable. She paused. Not preferred, acceptable. Alistair looked at her. You read him very quickly. I read people very quickly, she said. It is one of the things about me that your uncle finds troublesome. She turned back to face him. It is also, I suspect, one of the things that will eventually make him respect me. Not today, but eventually. The baby came in September, on a Wednesday afternoon, quietly, and with more efficiency than Dr. Stroud had expected. Berta managed everything with the authority of a woman who had attended a great many births, and found the surrounding drama largely unnecessary. She came out of the bedroom after 2 hours and said, a girl, both doing well. Then she went back in before Alistair could ask any of the questions that were visible on his face. He came into the room when Berta let him in. He sat beside the bed. He looked at the child, small, red-faced, entirely certain of her own importance, despite being approximately 4 hours old. And then at Emmeline, who was tired in the profound and specific way of someone who has just done something extremely difficult and cannot quite believe it is done. She has your eyes, he said. She has no idea what her eyes are yet, Emmeline said. She is 4 hours old. She has your expression, he said. That particular look. What look? The one that says she has already decided something and is not going to be talked out of it. Emmeline looked at the child. The child looked back at the middle distance with the ancient oceanic concentration of the newborn. She is 4 hours old, Emmeline said again. She has not decided anything. She has decided she is here, Alistair said, and that she intends to continue being here. That seems to be sufficient for now. Emmeline looked at him, at his face in the September light, open the way it had been in the parlor when she told him the truth, without guard or performance or management. She looked at him and thought about the quarry road, and the walk home from Dr. Stroud's surgery, and the morning she had pressed both palms to the cold glass of the window and counted what she had. She thought about how long she had been so determined not to be kept, that she had nearly confused it with refusing to be chosen. Alistair, she said. Yes. I love you, she said. I have loved you for. I am not entirely certain when it started. Before January, certainly. Possibly before that. She held his gaze. I did not tell you because I was afraid of what it would cost me, and because I needed to know that you were choosing me, not obligated to me. I needed to know the difference. He looked at her for a long moment. The unguarded thing was still in his face, the full and complete thing she had seen so rarely and valued so deeply. I know the difference, he said quietly. I have been choosing you since the morning I came to this house, and could not say yes when you asked whether I wanted the marriage to be over. He reached out and covered her hand with his. The same gesture, always, simple and without ceremony. I could not say yes because it was not what I wanted. It has never been what I wanted. She breathed once, slowly. All right, she said. Not the careful, provisional all right of April. Not the beginning of something all right of the weeks after. The full and final all right of a woman who has decided, with complete information, and clear eyes, and her own full and uncompromised will, that this is what she wants. The child made a small sound between them, not a cry, just a sound. The sound of someone announcing their presence and expecting it to be noted. Hello, Emmeline said to her, the same word, she would later realize, that her husband had said to this same child in a different way, through her hand and through the September air. In the moment he understood what it meant to have something that was entirely his own to protect. We have been waiting for you. Years later, when people in Harwich spoke of the Caldwells of Prior House, they did not speak of the dissolution papers, or the forged letter, or Leopold's 3 visits. They spoke of the family itself. Of the way Alistair Caldwell had moved the seat of his estate management 20 miles from the Caldwell family property. Because his wife had asked to be included in the decisions, and he had said yes and meant it, and never revisited the question. Of the small lending library Emmeline established in the Harwich Church Hall. Her father's books to start, then others donated by families across the county, because she believed that a woman who could read was a woman who was harder to manage without her knowledge or consent. Of the girl, dark-haired and willful, already reading at 3, and arguing the finer points at 4. Raised by 2 people who had learned at considerable cost the difference between obligation and love, and had chosen love deliberately and on purpose, every day, with full knowledge of what both things actually cost. Leopold Caldwell visited every Christmas until he was no longer able to travel. He sat in the front parlor and drank his coffee and argued about county politics with Emmeline, who was one of very few people he had ever encountered who could make him genuinely reconsider a position he had held for 30 years by the simple method of presenting a fact he had not accounted for. He never said he had been wrong about that first April. He never needed to. The evidence of it was in every room of the house, and he was a man who was, at bottom, too honest to pretend evidence did not exist. On his last Christmas visit, he sat in the chair by the window and watched Emmeline across the room. She was reading to the girl, both of them deeply invested in a disagreement about what the characters in the story ought to have done differently. He said to Alistair, very quietly and without preamble, "Your father would have loved her." "I know," Alistair said. "He would have told you that you were a fool," Leopold said. "He would have been diplomatic about it." "He would have been right about it," Leopold said, and drank his coffee and said nothing else. And the fire burned, and the girl argued about the story, and Emmeline laughed, and the house was full of the particular warmth of a life that had been chosen rather than fallen into. Chosen every day with clear eyes and full information, for exactly the right reasons. That, as Emmeline Caldwell had understood since she was 16 years old, standing at her mother's grave in the Connecticut spring and making herself a promise she intended to keep, was the only kind of love worth the cost of it.